My phone didn't just buzz, it screamed a violation. I was in Seattle, 3,000 miles away, in a conference room smelling of stale coffee. This was a career-defining week. Then, the notification flashed. Not a text from Mom. An alert from a police impound lot in Tybee Island, Georgia. My black Lexus GX, locked in my Atlanta garage, explicitly off-limits, had been towed 250 miles away. The boundary wasn't just crossed, it was shattered. I stared at the screen. No panic. Just a cold, sharp realization. This wasn't a mistake. It was a declaration of war. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Since we are stepping into 2026, I want to wish everyone a powerful new year. Let's make this the year we finally put ourselves first. And if you enjoy these stories, please support the channel so we can keep growing this community together. I stepped out of the conference room into the hallway, the murmur of the keynote speaker fading behind the heavy oak doors. My hand was steady as I brought the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was professional, detached, the voice of a man who had seen everything. Officer Miller explained the situation with clinical precision. My Lexus had been blocking a private driveway on Tybee Island for 6 hours. When the homeowners called it in, the people returning to the vehicle, a man and a woman in their 60s, accompanied by a younger woman, had argued with the tow truck driver. They claimed it was a family car. They claimed they had permission. They claimed it was all a misunderstanding. That phrase hung in the air between us. Family car. It implied communal property. It implied that my $80,000 asset, the one I paid for, the one I insured, the one I maintained, was somehow a public utility for them to access whenever they felt entitled to a beach weekend. In the past, I would have panicked. I would have asked if they were okay. I would have apologized to the officer and offered to pay the fine over the phone just to make the problem go away. But standing there in that hallway, 3,000 miles from the humidity of the Georgia coast, I felt a switch flip. This wasn't a mistake. It was theft wrapped in the entitlement of blood. I didn't ask if they were safe. I didn't ask for details. I simply said, "Officer, I am the sole owner of that vehicle. I am currently in Seattle. I did not give anyone permission to take that car out of my garage, let alone across state lines. If they are in possession of the keys, they obtained them illegally." There was a pause on the line. The shift in the officer's tone was immediate. He wasn't talking to a confused daughter anymore. He was talking to a victim of grand theft auto. He asked if I wanted them detained. I told him I wanted my property secured. I authorized him to flag the vehicle immediately. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again with the update. They hadn't just been towed. They had retrieved the car from the impound lot using a spare key they weren't supposed to have and tried to drive back to Atlanta before I found out. But they didn't make it far. Officer Miller informed me that a patrol unit had pulled them over on Interstate 16. My parents, Susan and Gary, along with my sister Courtney, were removed from the vehicle. I closed my eyes and let the image paint itself in my mind. I pictured them standing on the shoulder of the highway, the heat radiating off the asphalt, surrounded by cooler bags, beach towels, and sand-filled shoes. I pictured Courtney, the golden child who had never heard the word no in her life, realizing that her charm didn't work on the Georgia State Patrol. I pictured my mother's indignation, her belief that she could talk her way out of anything, crumbling as the tow truck hook descended for the second time that day. My phone began to light up. First Mom, then Dad, then Courtney, then Mom again. The screen flashed incessantly, a desperate Morse code of panic and rage. They were stranded 200 miles from home, likely with no way to get back, their luggage dumped on the roadside like trash. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt the cool, clean satisfaction of a ledger finally being balanced. I silenced the phone, slipped it into my blazer pocket, and walked back into the conference room. I had a networking lunch to attend, and for the first time in years, I had absolutely nothing to worry about. Some people might think I was cruel for leaving my elderly parents and my sister stranded on the side of an interstate highway in the middle of a heat wave. They might think I overreacted to a simple family misunderstanding, but those people don't know the history of the word no in my family. They don't understand that no isn't a boundary to my parents. It is a challenge, an insult they feel entitled to dismantle. Before I left for Seattle, I didn't just ask them not to drive my car. I explicitly told them the Lexus was off limits. I changed the code to my garage door. I took the spare key off the hook in the kitchen and locked it in a fireproof safe in my home office. I took these precautions because I learned my lesson 2 years ago. That was when Courtney, my golden sister, decided to borrow my previous car, a sedan I had just paid off, to drive to a concert she couldn't afford tickets for. She rear-ended a minivan while texting. The damage came to $5,160. When I presented the bill to my parents, my mother told me that making Courtney pay would damage her self-esteem. She called it a learning experience. She said family doesn't send invoices to family. I ended up paying every cent of that deductible and the increased insurance premiums, while Courtney posted selfies from the concert I had essentially financed. That was the day the Bank of Morgan officially closed. Or so I thought. Sitting in that hotel room in Seattle, staring at the ceiling, I realized I had been operating under a delusion for years. I had been trapped in the sunk cost fallacy of blood. In economics, a sunk cost is money that has already been spent and cannot be recovered. You aren't supposed to factor it into future decisions, but human beings are irrational. We keep pouring resources into failing investments because we can't bear to walk away from what we've already put in. I had been paying a blood tax my entire adult life. I paid it in silence when they forgot my birthday but demanded elaborate parties for Courtney. I paid it in cash when I covered emergencies they created. I paid it in patience when they dismissed my career as a hobby while worshipping Courtney's sporadic, half-hearted attempts at employment. I kept paying because I thought if I invested enough, eventually I would get a return. I thought if I was reliable enough, successful enough, generous enough, they would eventually look at me and see a daughter instead of a resource. But as I replayed the timeline of this theft, finding the hidden key, bypassing the garage code, driving 300 miles to a beach resort, I finally accepted the truth. There is no return on investment with narcissists. They don't see generosity. They see weakness. They don't see forgiveness. They see permission. My car wasn't borrowed. It was seized because they truly believed that anything I earned belonged to the collective, while anything Courtney wanted belonged to her. The tax was no longer affordable. I was done throwing good money and good years after bad. I wasn't just retrieving a car anymore. I was liquidating the account. I landed in Atlanta on a Wednesday afternoon and took a rideshare straight to the impound lot. The guy behind the counter looked at me with a mixture of pity and boredom as I slid my credit card across the glass. The total came to $2,280. I signed the receipt without flinching. Walking to my Lexus, I felt a wave of nausea, not from the cost, but from the violation. It didn't look like my car anymore. There was a long, jagged scratch running across the passenger door, probably from a beach chair being dragged carelessly against the paint. Inside, the smell hit me instantly, a sickly sweet combination of coconut tanning oil, stale fast food, and wet dog. Sand was ground into the floor mats. A sticky residue coated the center console. My sanctuary, the one place where I had total control, had been trashed. I drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to see their faces when I pulled up in the vehicle they had stolen. I parked in the driveway and walked through the front door. They were all there in the living room: Susan, Gary, and Courtney. They looked exhausted, their sunburns peeling, still wearing the clothes they had been stranded in. A normal family would have been mortified. A normal parent would have rushed over to apologize, to offer to pay for the damages, to beg for forgiveness. But I didn't grow up in a normal family. I grew up in a hierarchy, and I had just broken the chain of command. Susan stood up the moment I entered. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask about the car. She pointed a finger at me, her face contorted in a rage I had rarely seen directed at anyone but strangers. She screamed that I was selfish. She screamed that I had humiliated them. She asked how I could leave my own flesh and blood on the side of a highway like criminals. In that moment, I finally understood the mechanism of their cruelty. Psychologists call this a narcissistic injury. To a narcissist, a boundary isn't just a line you can't cross. It is an attack on their identity. By reporting the car stolen, I hadn't just inconvenienced them. I had shattered their delusion that they owned me. I had publicly demonstrated that I was a separate entity with legal rights, not an extension of their will. Their rage wasn't about the heat or the towing fees. It was about the loss of control. Gary chimed in, his voice booming with entitlement. He told me that everything I had, my career, my money, my car, was only possible because of them. He claimed I owed them for my success, that my assets were essentially family property because they had raised me. Courtney sat on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, occasionally looking up to mutter that I was being dramatic and that it was just a car. They were rewriting reality in real time, painting me as the villain for reclaiming my own property. I realized then that there was no conversation to be had. You cannot negotiate with people who believe your autonomy is a personal insult. I didn't yell back. I didn't try to defend myself. I looked at the three of them, these strangers who shared my DNA, and realized the bank wasn't just closed, it was being demolished. Leaving wasn't an act of rage, it was an act of disposal. I walked out of that house with the silence of someone closing a business deal gone bad. They were still shouting as I backed out of the driveway, their voices muffled by the soundproof glass of the Lexus they had defiled. I drove home in silence. There were no tears this time. There was only the hum of the engine and the clarity of a decision already made. When I got to my house, I didn't collapse on the couch. I went straight to my home office, woke up my computer, and opened a spreadsheet. It was time to conduct an audit. For years, I had been the silent infrastructure of their lives, the safety net they didn't even know was there. I started with the recurring expenses. First, the Amazon subscriptions. Every month, cases of organic fruit snacks and diapers arrived at Courtney's apartment, paid for by my Prime account, because she had once complained about how expensive kids were. Click, cancel, next, the veterinarian's office. My credit card was on file as the backup payment method for the family dog. A card that had been charged 3 times in the last year for emergencies that were really just routine checkups my parents couldn't afford. I called the office and removed my authorization. Deleted. Finally, the joint bank account I had opened with my father 5 years ago for true emergencies. I transferred the remaining balance to my personal savings and closed the account. The silence lasted exactly 48 hours. That's how long it took for the first decline transaction to hit. Then, the smear campaign began. It started with a vague Facebook status from Courtney about cold-hearted people who value money over family. Then came the phone calls. My aunt called me, worried, because my mother had told her I was having a mental breakdown. She told the extended family I was unstable, paranoid, and lashing out at everyone who loved me. They were trying to control the narrative, painting me as the villain, so they could remain the victims. I didn't argue. I didn't post a rant. I simply compiled a PDF. It contained 3 pages. Page 1. The police report from the Tybee Island Police Department, clearly stating unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. Page 2. The towing invoice for $2,280. Page 3. A photograph of the damage to my car. I sent this document without a subject line to the 3 most sensible relatives in our family tree, my uncle, my godmother, and my oldest cousin. I didn't ask for support. I just provided the receipts. The rumors stopped almost instantly. The truth is a quiet weapon, but it cuts deeper than any lie ever could. 2 days later, I was in my driveway with a shop vac, trying to exorcise the smell of my family from the leather seats of my Lexus. I was scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain of what looked like melted chocolate from the back seat when I saw it. Wedged deep between the cushion and the console, something white caught the light. I dug it out. It was a card, expensive cardstock, cream-colored with gold foil lettering. I opened it, expecting a receipt, or maybe a parking pass. Instead, I found a handwritten note. Courtney, it was so lovely to meet you this weekend. Your new car is absolutely stunning. Thank you for driving us to the brunch. We're so excited to see where things go with you and Tyler. Warmly, Mrs. Abernathy. I sat back on my heels, the card trembling in my hand. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Tyler, that was the name of the new boyfriend Courtney had been gushing about, the one from the wealthy family in Savannah. They hadn't just stolen my car for transportation. They hadn't just wanted a free ride to the beach. They had used my Lexus as a prop. It all made sense now. The secrecy, the location, the specific insistence on taking my car instead of renting one. They were staging a life for Courtney. They were presenting her as the successful, wealthy daughter who drove an $80,000 SUV while erasing me entirely. To the Abernathys, I didn't exist. I was just the ghost in the machine, the invisible bank account that funded the illusion. In that moment, the nature of my sister's entitlement shifted in my mind. She wasn't just spoiled, she was hollow. This was the golden child phantom, a person so devoid of substance that she required the stolen skins of others to feel real. She needed my car, my money, my stability, because without them, she was just a 26-year-old with no job and a history of bad decisions. They had erased me to build her up. They had cannibalized my success to feed her fantasy. I looked at the card again, at the elegant handwriting thanking a thief for her hospitality. The anger that had been simmering in my gut turned into something colder, something final. They wanted to play pretend? Fine. I was about to turn the lights on. The next morning, my phone alerted me to a new transaction. Not an incoming deposit, but a withdrawal. $720 had been drained from a custodial savings account I had opened with my father when I was 19 and had long forgotten about. The notification was the final nail in the coffin of my family loyalty. My father, Gary, desperate to pay Tyler back for the towing fees and the rideshare costs he couldn't afford because he had spent his retirement playing the big shot, had resorted to theft. He didn't ask. He just took, assuming as always that my money was his safety net. I didn't call the bank to dispute it yet. I printed the transaction record. Then I drove to my office. I had barely sat down at my desk when the receptionist buzzed me. "Morgan, your sister is here. She's upset." Courtney was standing in the lobby, wearing oversized sunglasses and looking like a woman on the edge of a breakdown. When she saw me, she didn't apologize. She launched straight into the crisis. "You have to help me," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "Tyler wants to go to the mountains this weekend. He asked why I'm not driving the Lexus. I told him it was in the shop, but he wants to pick it up. Morgan, please, just one more weekend. I just need it for 2 days to keep the story straight until he proposes. Then I'll tell him everything. Please." She was begging for the prop back. She needed the costume to keep playing the character she had invented. I analyzed her, taking in the trembling hands and the desperate eyes, seeing the panic of an imposter whose stage was collapsing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "Here," I said. She took it, relief flooding her face. "The keys?" "No," I said. "The receipts." She opened the envelope. Inside was the police report for the stolen car, the towing invoice, and the fresh transaction record showing our father's theft of $720. I had also included a cease and desist letter drafted by my lawyer regarding any further unauthorized use of my property or funds. "The performance is over, Courtney," I said, my voice steady in the quiet lobby. "You don't have a Lexus. You don't have money. And you don't have a sister who is willing to fund your lies anymore. You can tell Tyler the truth, or I will send him this file myself." She stared at me, the color draining from her face as the reality of her situation took hold. The prop was gone. The safety net was gone. She was standing on her own 2 feet for the first time in her life, and she was terrified. I turned around and walked back to my office, leaving her standing there with the evidence of her own fraud in her hands. The fallout was swift and brutal, but it wasn't my burden to carry. When Courtney finally told Tyler the truth, or rather, when she failed to produce the car and the lie unraveled under the weight of her panic, the engagement ended before it even began. The Abernathys, polite but discerning people, quietly distanced themselves from a family that staged wealth like a theater production. My parents were furious, of course. They called me every name in the book, accused me of ruining Courtney's life, of being vindictive, of destroying the family. But their voices were faint now, filtered through blocked numbers and ignored voicemails. The extended family, the ones who had seen the receipts, stopped enabling them. For the first time, Susan and Gary had to face the consequences of their entitlement without a safety net to catch them. They were isolated, not because I had turned people against them, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. I changed my phone number 2 weeks later. I hired a detailer to clean my car, stripping away every last grain of sand and every smudge of chocolate until it smelled only of leather and my own perfume. It was a symbolic baptism, washing away the last traces of their entitlement. Driving home one evening, the sun setting over the Atlanta skyline, I realized how quiet my life had become. There were no emergency calls demanding money, no guilt trips about missed birthdays, no anxiety about what boundary they would cross next. The silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I had spent years trying to buy their love, paying a tax that only increased with inflation. Now, the account was closed. I was the villain in their story, yes. But I was finally the hero in my own. And as I merged onto the highway, putting distance between myself and the people who had tried to erase me, I didn't look back. I just kept driving, safe in the knowledge that the only person in the driver's seat was me. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to keep yourself warm, hit that subscribe button. You're safe here.